Hello, everyone coming in. Welcome to Full Hands In, Full Hands Out batching part 2. And we'll just wait a few minutes for everyone to join in. It's been like over a year. We already used to the awkward first 5 minutes of just waiting for the chat room to fill in. All right, so it looks like we have a good number of people in. So again, welcome everybody. This is Tales of the Cocktail Foundation's Full Hands In, Full Hands Out. And we are here doing a batching part 2. My name is A-K Hada. I was a white coat or a CAP leader in the CAP program for the last couple years. Before this last year, and I'm here with Alexis Belton and Juyoung. Do you guys want to introduce yourself a little bit, where you are, where you work? Juyoung, you want to take it off?
Sure. I'm in Las Vegas. Currently, I am at the Dorsey at the Venetian, Las Vegas. I am switching jobs to working at another place at Resorts World. It's a new property that's opening up.
Sorry, I didn't get that. The internet isn't reachable.
Sorry.
Oh,
I have an Alexa.
Technical difficulties. Well, I just have my hands full in a lot of different things, but that's about it.
Am I up next?
Yep. Go for it.
I thought you were waiting for something else and just like staring at you. Hey, Alexis, I am based out of Chicago, Illinois. I work at the aviary and the office in Chicago. I think I just saw in the chat, Alex wanted me to possibly say some other stuff. What we are doing right now, we did just reopen the aviary about 3-4 weeks ago, and the office has been open since late April. So it's just been kind of gradually opening up. And I guess in terms of batching, we batch all our cocktails. We have since I actually started there 7.5 years ago. This was kind of the first encounter I had with sorry, I don't know if my internet's being crazy too. There we go. Sorry. My first encounter 7.5 years ago, starting at the aviary with batching. So I didn't even know it was really a thing that was happening until I started there. We kind of started small scale batching. So we would do certain items and then it kind of exploded into a full scale batching thing. So now everything that we work with is typically batched.
Amazing. And I'll introduce myself again. I'm A-K Hada. For the majority of when I first met you guys, I was the head bartender at PDT for a long time, and left to be the GM at Existing Conditions. And then this past winter, I was working with Dante, but specifically some of their remote partnerships. So to kind of tie in with my most recent experience in batching, Dante did a partnership with Jean-Georges at a pier in the financial district that had a big rooftop. So over this last winter, they had individual cabins that guests could rent or reserve rather, order on an iPad, and you could get all of Dante's bottled cocktails, as well as some hot cocktails and cocktails on tap. So everything was pre-prepared in a kitchen. So my CAP experience certainly came into handy there. We would do, huge numbers really because it was a giant rooftop venue. But then, with 2 bartenders, because all the bartenders were doing were opening and closing fridges more or less, or pulling from tap. So it looks like a poll went out to kind of see how many people saw the first batching 101. And it looks like most of you, and that's wonderful because I feel like Trevor and John did such a great job of really going into detail a lot of the systems and training that we did down in New Orleans with the CAP program. So today I feel like we take it from New Orleans back to our bars and kind of talk a little bit more personally about how we sort of used that experience at Tails and those systems that John and Trevor went through and applied it to our individual bar programs. Awesome. Yeah, so I guess the first thing that we'll talk about just sort of generally is sort of the homework. You know, like when I was watching Trevor and John, I feel like the big takeaway that I've gotten from working at Tails and then again this last winter, certainly batching everything was really batching is all about the homework. It's all about the pre-preparation. You know, I think each of us will kind of take some time to sort of go into our own personal experiences, maybe over this past year, doing more batching than we normally would have done, and then how we're applying it as things start to open back up. And please definitely use the Q&A button. We are here. This is going to be really informal and hopefully lots of fun, sharing funny stories. So please shout out any questions that you have. Cool. So Juyoung or Alexis, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe like some new systems that you put into place, or whether it's like spreadsheets or like how you kind of got organized over this last year as things, you know, obviously new challenges popped up?
Yeah, so funny enough, while we were shut down and we were doing takeout, it was actually much more disorganized. I found like myself reverting back to using C-folds because I didn't have anybody I needed to share recipes with. It was me, my boss, Micah, and then our other bar manager, Jarmel. And so the three of us kind of handled all of the takeout items. Everything was batched large scale, and to the effect that it was batched larger than large scale. So normally like we might do a batch in a 22 quart, and that's something that we sell a lot of. And then maybe an 8 quart is something we sell a little bit more infrequently. We were batching into Lexans. So I can fit my entire body into the size of a Lexan that we were using. And we would batch like 3 Lexans full of product. And in Chicago, when we first shut down, you weren't allowed to sell bottled cocktails. So we had to sell like a 750 of mixer with a 750 of a basically factory sealed bottle of alcohol by law. So the batches became larger because every time somebody purchased something, it wasn't just one cocktail, they were purchasing 12 drinks from you at once. So we had to take that into account. And then in terms of like trying to keep organized, like I said, because it was the 3 of us, I actually had to go back through when we hired our staff back on and go find all of my C-folds and all of my scrap notes that I had like shoved into my laptop bag and start inputting those back in. So that's probably like not the best case scenario, but I think because it was just me and myself and I can read my chicken scratch, I was like, no one's gonna care. And then as soon as people came back, they're like, we can't find anything on the drive. And I was like, go in my laptop bag, go find the piece of C-fold that's like crushed and stained, and that's probably the recipe you're looking for. So, but yeah, to that effect, like much larger scale batching during shutdown.
Yeah. Yeah, it was wild when we first opened. Like the Greens was what that like Dante venue was called. It was like the first time we made an old fashioned, we did it in like 70-liter batches, like just like giant. Yeah, like the huge Lexans. And it was nice there because it was a big corporate venue. So we had tons of walk-in fridges. But then, you know, when we did stuff, I've done stuff at like, you know, some like smaller venues in Brooklyn, you're like, wait, where's my giant corporate walk-in that I can put all 12 Lexans in? And it's like, it was such a juggling thing. But yeah, I feel like Alexis, that brings up a really good point of like one of the complications at Tails is almost like, it's almost harder when you're working with more hands because it involves so much more communication and more consistency versus, yeah, if it's just you, or there were maybe like 2 of us when I was working, you just kind of like talk to each other. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're like, oh shit, you know, what? Am I allowed to curse on here? I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. You know, you're like, oh no, you know, I have to actually have it in a spreadsheet that people can find and read. Totally. But yeah, Juyoung, I mean, you work for like a giant venue.
Yeah, I was gonna say my situation is a little bit different. I don't feel like, I know everyone else was shut down for a lot longer than we were. We were only shut down for almost 3 months, and then we like went back in, and it was like 80%, then went down to 50%, then it went down to 25%, then went back up to 50%, and then went to 80, and now we're fully at 100 again. So we've been open. We've been only open for like 4 days a week, and then I want to say about 2 months ago we opened up 7 days a week again. But we've been busy. I mean, we've been crazy busy, but we've been batching since we opened. Most places I work, we've batched because the volume is just too crazy. A lot of other places, their volume is like 50 people at once. So we get like 300. And so like we batch everything in like little, well, we use the Ford's bottles or liter bottles. And we label everything. We'll label the we need to do partial cocktails. So mostly like any cocktails that have anything from like 2 or 3 ingredients or more, like liquor wise, we batch all that. All of our booze forward stuff are batched, except for bitters and stuff like that. We do partial to add to put out. But our whole thing is you use it, you batch it. Like, so if you made it, you batch it, so that, because it's just too much for one person to do.
Yeah.
And an opening bartender can't always do it, and then the closing bartender can't always do it. Usually like the mid-shift bartender has the least amount of responsibility sometimes, but they take care of the most amount of people. So there's like a little bit of balance of what we all do. And it's kind of like an understanding of how, like, we're all on a WhatsApp chat, and then we all just kind of like chat on what's going on. Everyone has a recipe. Like we have like, I have little cheat sheets behind a bar, where it's like a one sheet with all the recipes on there, and then like you just multiply that for how many times it goes in the bottle. Sometimes what people make for like 3 liters at a time or whatnot. But each well has a batch, and we label them with the name of the cocktail, how much of the mix to pour, what other additional things you need to pour in, and then if there's bitters or anything crazy, like if you top off with soda and stuff like that. I expect everyone to remember their own garnishes and glassware. Like that's the easy part.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, the thing we ran into the problem with is when we do batching, we use up a lot of product. So, I mean, I'm sure everyone has gone through this, but you know, this past year we ran out of everything. So if we normally use, like, say, one of our cocktails, we normally use Hennessy. Couldn't get Hennessy to like save my life. So we had to substitute other brands and other things to go with it. But it's like trying to find out was a little bit difficult. And then of course, then the drink tasted a little bit different, but for the most part, it's the same. But then we also noticed our crowd was different. So they didn't really take notice.
I like the idea that you talked about where you guys like couldn't get stuff or things ran out and all these things. So while we were like shut down, like distributors, if you had 4 reps for one, like Southern, I think at Southern I have like 17 reps, but like it went from 17 to one person who was basically someone else's boss at one point, who is now handling a ton of accounts. So we actually, like, not only did we run out of stuff, but it was hard to communicate with our distributors and get things, and they oftentimes couldn't get back to you in time. We actually started like running through our stock, because while we do select things because they are a certain brand and had a flavor profile we liked, I think at some point we also realized that, like, hey, we're in control. We can modify other parts of this drink to make sense if we don't have what we need. So like a lot of substitutions for like main spirits and other modifiers, like we couldn't get dry curacao, the one that we use for, you know, for the longest time. So we're like, we'll just figure it out. We'll make our own. We'll do like an orange cordial, we'll make it in-house, or we'll use Combier and we'll drop like the simple syrup. So we actually, I think, learned a lot about how we can be in control of our batches during this time, where normally we just have access to everything. Not having access to a lot of stuff kind of forced us into looking at things in a different way. which actually helped us be less wasteful and helped us, like, in a way, even though we weren't spending a lot, it helps us now bring our liquor costs down because we can utilize stuff that we have in-house, or we can substitute on the fly a lot quicker than we were previously.
Yeah, I feel like when you're forced to do that, it's like you really have to taste individual spirits. I feel like once, when you're going, you have your drink recipes, but then as soon as, something's out, you're like, oh, wait, well, what is the difference between this brandy and this brandy? Or what is the difference between Pierre Ferrand and Combier? It brings up a funny memory of the last tales that we had in person. I don't know if people watching remember, but there was the hurricane that did or didn't happen. I can't remember if Alexis and Juyoung, if you were there, but it was definitely the day that the Whitecoats got there. But it was when the hurricane was supposed to hit, and we were sitting at Aaron Rose, and the TV was on, and the TV had the news playing like, there's rain, there's people canoeing down Bourbon Street, and we're sitting on Bourbon Street and it's like sunny and dry, like, what? But then what ended up happening is our liquor order for that, our liquor and produce order, just, I would say about a third of our products just like didn't show, and that was the year at Tales that we had the headliners. So we had a lot of events and things coming in that were like John and Trevor talked about, like your easy cocktails versus your difficult cocktails. And that year was a lot of like really specific difficult cocktails, like odd cordials and weird herbs. And I think that was like the year of the porn star martini. So everyone had passion fruit and vanilla stuff, and none of it showed up, but like you said, Alexis, you kind of figure out like, okay, well, what do I have? What's my end goal? There's a lot of different routes to get there. Yeah, totally. Which kind of, it's a good segue into sort of like our next section. I think we talked a little bit about organizing or lack thereof, or getting there, whether it's C-folds or spreadsheets. But once you do have all of your recipes organized, I think a lot of people were asking about like what were different methods that we use for sub recipes. Especially if you're doing large volume, or if you were doing large volume and then you have to increase your volume. Are there different techniques that you use, tools, tips with organizing yields, that kind of a thing? I'll let you guys take it away.
Well, I guess I can speak on volume because like we certainly have cocktails that are a lot more popular than others, or we go through a lot more of because they're easier to drink. So then they order another one. So we have multiple batches for those, and then we have them on the side, especially for like the service bar areas, because they put out more drinks for the rest of the room. But I mean, like what I said, my bar has 4 wells, and there are 4 giant wells, and we have a batch behind each bar of each well. So there's plenty of room in my bar. I know like a lot of other places don't have that. I'm pretty spoiled in that aspect. And it's funny because like in our world, we think we don't have enough room, but compared to a lot of other places in their bars, we have a ton of room. So I mean, like, and anything else, we put them in refrigerators and things like that. So we organize it in that sense. And I mean, every week we gauge to see what's different, what's not. What moves faster or not. Like certain weeks we have certain conventions in town where they drink something else more than others. Then we'll double up on those batches or triple up on those batches than anything else. But we don't always do that. So we gauge according to that. It's been a lot more difficult now because the fact that our crowd's been very different almost every week. So that makes it harder for us to gauge that. But so usually like one day of the week, it's a complete, did we figure out we can curse or not? But it's a complete shit show.
Shit is okay.
We said shit is okay. So.
Okay. Yeah. So like one day of the week becomes a complete shit show because we don't have anything. We're like scrambling to make everything out. But then all the other days become smoother because we figure it out. But it's like a day by day process for the most part.
Do you, does your program, do you have a ton of, like house-made ingredients? Like, do you use a ton of,
Some of our syrups are house made, but for the most part, not everything.
Mhm.
But there are things like if we know like we also have cheater bottles. So like if we have to build the cocktails, we can do that. So we're not wasting a lot of product. Because sometimes we'll make a batch and it doesn't go through anything. So we're like, why even make it?
Mhm.
And then like there's a couple things like that we do that we just kind of like play along with in a sense. Hi John, I just saw your
Hi,
message.
John. We love you too. Yeah.
But like for the most part, it's like we just kind of like organize it in the sense of like what's going to happen during the week or what's been popular, what's not, and everyone like I guess kind of makes sense with this whole segment of saying full hands in, full hands out, because like literally at my bar, like everyone's hands are in and hands are out, so
Yeah.
it kind of makes
And
sense.
then when you do like menu changes, do you find that you have to, like, do you usually do full menu changes? Like when you're batching, are you anticipating trying to run out of your batches? Do you end up building more cocktails?
Yeah,
Like how?
so like when we know we're gonna do a menu change, like for the month, we don't make the batches.
Mhm.
We kind of just like wean it out and then we just kind of build it as we go
Yeah.
until unless like the last couple of times when we had the menu change, it took forever for the menu change to happen. So we're like, we'll make this batch halfway, we'll make this batch full. And like so it became one of those things. And there's a couple drinks that do stay on the menu, so we keep the batches down.
Yeah, totally. We actually had a question and I might shoot it over to Alexis, because I know you guys, obviously for the aviary, you do a ton of homemade ingredients. So very different style. But the question, first question was, is it a no-no to add juice to your batch drink? And in the case of adding citrus to a batch, how long is it safe to sell? Do the spirits keep it stable? And does the refrigeration extend the life of the batch?
That's a great question. So this is something that we encountered once again during shutdown. On a typical day for our bar, we do not add citrus to our batches. So your batch contains, and I know Juyoung mentioned that like they look at their batches a little bit differently. Sometimes the bitters and things that you can add in quick dashes are put into cheater bottles. We typically put everything together in the batch because we size our batches according to how popular or how quickly things sell. So everything goes into the batch except for the juice. We add that to sell simply because if you've ever tasted juice from fresh today to possibly tomorrow, it does oxidize, it loses a lot of like that kind of zesty, that quality to it. It tastes a little bit funky sometimes. And so we always utilize fresh juice when we can. If we have juice that day and we know we're not going to run through it, we will actually freeze our juice and put it aside, and we'll use it the next day because that freezing can kind of help slow that process and keep it its integrity up for the next time you want to use it. In the idea of if you do want to add juice to your batches, the way that we've always looked at this is we try to find other things that we can add into the batch to kind of make sure that the acid level is going to stay stable. So if we did add a lemon juice to a batch for something to go and we had to bottle it and somebody might keep it for a few days, we might also incorporate other things like a passion fruit or other fruits or juices that are going to have high acid levels that aren't going to oxidize as quickly. We've also incorporated using like citric or malic acids according to like what you might need to kind of give the cocktail a little bit of boost. And while it does increase the shelf life if it stays refrigerated, obviously if there's perishable items, you should always, you know, in my mind, refrigerate. We typically will say from the day that we make and bottle it, 7 days out is kind of our standard. You should drink it within this time. I'm sure people have gone longer and I'm sure things have been totally fine if they forgot a bottle of takeout stuff in their fridge. But that's kind of how we adjust acids to have a longer life if someone's going to take something home, and that's kind of the time period that we suggest using it within.
Yeah, I feel like it's so much like anticipation too, you know, like over the last year, the way that people were so much of your perception of like, is this drink quality or not? It is different if you're like sat at a bar and someone's shaking it and then they hand it to you. I feel like you're focused so much more. But with to-go stuff or, just more casual settings are kind of like, okay, well, can I really taste the difference if that margarita was frozen for a day? That kind of a thing. But yeah, I mean, that's a great answer. Mr. Darragon actually had a question. I guess this was going back more towards what Juyoung was saying about like service, but like when you run out of a batch cocktail mid-service, do you switch to a single cocktail prep service or do you have someone making a new batch during service? Because I know that you said like obviously everyone's in charge of their own batches. So do you have a prep team or like a bar back also in charge of that?
Typically we don't let the barbacks make batches or things like that because they're not allowed to really pour. Like in union properties, they're not allowed to pour. And well, my property is not union, but like so there's like this weird thing like when someone's coming from a union property where they're not allowed to pour. So most of them don't pour. Some of them do help pour. Like at our bar, we encourage it because we want them to like learn and become a bartender. Oddly enough, we've been pretty lucky where we have not run out of batch mid shift. But if it does, we do go to single pour. But also like there's always someone there to make another batch. Like there's always someone ready to make something. Or it's like we're not all 4 wells are going at the same time sometimes, especially in the beginning of the night. So we would just steal the batch from there, and then like when we have to be okay, we're not forced, but we have to go on break. So like if we're gonna go on break and it's like they need something, then we'll take the 10 minutes to make it really quick before we go on break and stuff like that. Well, at least I do. I don't know if anybody else does it, but that's because I don't like people to fail. And but like that's kind of like the mentality I've built behind my bar, and I hope they continue that. Because that's just how I feel like we should work anyway. But
yeah, like teamwork.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, luckily we just haven't run out. So I mean, when I come to that, probably will have a better answer. But for the most part, I mean, typically we would probably go into single serve. I mean, I've never worked in a place where we created just to-go cocktails for everyone because in Vegas you can take anything to go.
Yeah.
Like you just put it in a plastic cup and just give it to them. It's kind of like the way in New Orleans is in a sense. So, but the only thing we haven't done is serve big cocktails because there's like a rule, like you can't serve anyone more than 2 drinks in a sense.
Got it.
It's an understated rule, but
yeah, it's definitely, so I've just started a new job with Bacardi. I'm the North American ambassador for rums, but learning about all the legalities across the entire country is wild. I mean, just like how every different state is set up, and especially now as we're trying to sort of figure out, okay, how do we get out there once we can start traveling again, like how do we best support bars right now? And everywhere is so different, but it's pretty wild on like legal levels. Totally. And then I guess we had a question that's going a little bit, I'm going to shoot it back to Alexis, but do you use like analogs of fresh citrus, for example, like oleosaccharides or acid blends? I think you touched on this a little bit, like you do use like certain acids, but I mean, I feel like when we were at Existing, the main thing that, and I feel like it's obvious, but I never had somebody phrase it in such a way, was Dave was like, acids add acid, they don't add flavor. And that was such a big, like, duh, of course they don't, but like just the putting it that way, because I feel like there was this trend of like, oh, well, I'm going to make shelf stable lemon juice by just adding citric and malic. And then you taste your drink and you're like, why does it taste weird? And it's like, because it's just sour. It doesn't have flavor. But has there been anything that like over the past year, have you found any sort of other creative methods for citrus or?
To be honest, I agree with you. Lemon and lime, those flavors can't really be replicated. We've tried so many things to try to preserve or reuse or upcycle. And while some of them have really good applications, it's not for everything. Like for a daiquiri, I don't think I could honestly say that I would want to have 3-day-old lime juice that I reacidulated to try to pop that acid back up and make a daiquiri. And I'd be like, oh, I don't notice the difference. I definitely would. But I think if you're looking at it from a bartender perspective and a consumer perspective, there are creative things you can do to certain drinks. Like if you're doing riffs on stuff, sometimes like oleosaccharides or juice blends have a really good place in things like that. I just don't think that I can say that I would do something like that for like a classic that called for straight citrus juice like that you needed, because at the end of the day, they do provide a certain depth or quality to cocktails. And I think that why we struggle so hard sometimes to replicate it is because it really is very hard to replicate exactly what that gives a cocktail, whether it's roundness or mouthfeel or texture or certain types of like levels of acid. So the answer, I guess, long and short is yes, we do use other juice blends and acidulated orange juice and oleosaccharides, but usually in conjunction with lemon or lime, or, you know, if we're using grapefruit juice as well. We don't just use those as a complete substitute.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Next question coming up. Do you usually pre-dilute batches, or do you typically shake and stir to dilution and to order? I had tons of like,
I have
like,
so many thoughts on this.
I know. So when I was working with Dante, like most of the bottled cocktails that we did were some kind of like 3 major categories. There was like Negroni-ish stuff, whiskey-ish stuff, and then like martini-ish stuff. And I feel like the way that we went about diluting things was so, is organic the right word? Maybe, you know, like I wish that, because I feel like with dilution, what I want in my head is like all of them should be this dilution, but every cocktail was so different, you know, because it's just, I feel like, are you serving it in a plastic cup over ice? Are you serving it in a chilled cup over ice? Is it a martini that you're serving up? Is it a martini that you're still serving in a plastic cup over ice because it's to go and it's, you know, I don't know, January in New York and we're all in the shit. I can say that, you know. But yeah, and then, you know, certainly like draft cocktails, all that stuff. Yeah, Alexis, you have a lot to say. Go for it.
Not a lot to say. I feel like I have a lot of feelings about it. And the funniest part about this is that me and my boss will sometimes, like, I don't want to say we butt heads, but like we have different, like he'll be like, let's just pre-dilute that shaken cocktail and let's put them in bottles and keep them on ice. And I'm like, no, how about we shake the cocktails that need to be shaken to order, but they're already batched, so that takes way less time. I'm totally a proponent of pre-diluting. Like I'll put like a 50-50 martini in my freezer at home and pre-dilute it and have it ready to pour. I feel like when you're stirring things and adding dilution that way, it's different than when you're shaking something and you're also adding like air and texture into it. So I feel like the mouthfeel is very different on items like that. Yep. And pre-diluting a stir drink isn't going to affect that. Whereas if you pre-dilute something that was meant to be shaken to begin with, I feel like you can definitely tell that it tastes different and it's texturally different. But like we have all different levels of how we do this on the bar. So like we have cocktails that are stirred cocktails that we just pour into glassware, like a barrel aged cocktail, pre-diluted and kept in the freezer and then poured to order. We also have like our shaken cocktails. We basically batch those into tins. So funny story, when Aviary first opened, I believe we bought Cocktail Kingdom out of all of their weighted shakers. We have like a really old school brand, and we have a wall of shaker tops and bottoms. And every time a bartender uses one, we don't have like triple sinks or sinks on the bar line. They actually just go down into the dish station, get washed, and they get brought back up. So we have tons of shaker tins, like an obscene amount. And so we just basically put the batches into the tins during our turns, because we have 3 or 4 seatings a night. We'll add the juice to that batch as we're building it, and then they'll shake it, and then you'll serve it. So the batch is basically done. It just needs to have ice added in to be shaken. And then we have a last category, which is under diluted, because it's going to be, like you mentioned, AKA sitting on ice. And that's usually the one that we have. It comes in an ice like shell. And so the ice shell actually is going to keep adding dilution because it's ice. And so we have to under dilute that. And that's always one of the hardest ones to do, because although the ice shell is weighed out to a very specific like weight range to add a very specific amount of water, it's hard to like taste something that's under diluted and be like, yeah, this is great. Like, this is going to be great, because it's not right to begin with. And so you're hoping that at the end of the day, that water that gets added in from this ice shell, and you can sit there and measure it out. It's just weird to taste something that's not fully diluted. And, you know, you've tasted it when it's fully diluted, and just knowing that you're serving something that's not fully diluted to a guest, and their first sip is going to be really intense, and just hoping that they understand that in about 30 to 45 seconds, it's going to be where it needs to be. So it's like 3 or 4 different types of how we use dilution.
Yeah, I remember we had a big argument with Dave Arnold about crushed ice, because he was like, why would you shake something to perfectly dilute it and then pour it over crushed ice? And then in 2 seconds, it's going to get, you know, it was a whole, you know, because right, you can't like put a number on it, or you can't like define it. So he was like, well, why? What is the point of it? That kind of a thing. And we didn't totally have an answer for it. But we just had to tell him that he was wrong, you know, which he doesn't like to hear.
That's gonna be hard to do.
A lot. We're like, look, you're just wrong, you know. And then he's like, right, but why? You know, and we're like, because of like every Mai Tai ever made. You know, like, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, Juyoung, do you pre-dilute at all, or?
We don't pre-dilute anything, because we make everything to order. We just partial batch everything, and then we add citrus, and then do the shaking everything and send it out. I think mostly because like everyone that comes to our bar, like they change their minds on what drinks they want to have. Some drinks stuff on our menu and some of them don't. So the ones that don't, then we did come up with something. So it's like, it's hard to like have another system of like, oh, and these ones are going to be pre-diluted. Like it just doesn't work for us.
Yeah.
And I think when people come to our bar, they like the fact that it's strong for some reason before it dilutes too much. So like when we make them like an old fashioned or a Manhattan or any of our booze forward cocktails, like it takes a bit of dilution, but when we give them the big cube, we shake it, and then like all they do is talk about the ice more than anything else. They don't even care about how it tastes. They're like, look how clear this ice is. And it's like a mind-blowing experience for them. And
The little things, you know.
yeah. And they just like love it. But yeah, it's we don't pre-dilute only because like we don't have cocktails that actually go, like you can bottle up to go. It will certainly make it easier for me to pre-dilute at home so I can have a cocktail ready to go, so I don't have to make it, because I've been making drinks all day.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it yeah, at my bar it doesn't work. So I mean, I think every situation is different, and every cocktail that you make is completely different. So it's just, you have to look at the situation you're at, what kind of bar you're at, and what kind of volume you do to figure out if you want to even implement the system.
Yeah. And I feel like that's, you know, like with batching and bartending, that's like where the human element comes in. Like ultimately you can't completely define something that is a craft. So if you're, you know, bartending behind your bar, making single drinks at a time, it takes a long time to figure out how to dilute drinks well, how to shake it for the right amount of time, how to stir it for the right amount of time. And I think it's the same thing for batching. It's, you know, ultimately a situational thing, and a drink thing. Every drink is different. Every venue is different. So I don't know if that answered that person's question, but yeah, lots of feelings about dilution. We have a question. How do you handle garnishes for batch cocktails? Do you prep them ahead based on batch size or a la minute? You know, like obviously the aviary has like crazy beautiful garnishes that need to be pre-prepped, but you know, then how do you gauge that so you don't have a ton of waste or that sort of a thing?
Well, to answer the latter part of that, so like reduce waste, I've always thought that garnish should to some degree be functional. Like it maybe doesn't always have a home on a drink, even if it looks great, if it doesn't add something to the drink that you're enjoying. A big thing that I actually do is I like to do aromatics over top instead, like something like a high proof tincture that will leave like an aroma rather than always utilizing some sort of fruit or garnish. Obviously, there's a time and a place for all of that. Like an old fashioned really does, you know, that orange enhances it. So if we're talking about large scale garnish, typically what we will do is if we need a lot of fruit peels and whatnot, we will go ahead and peel those ahead of time. One example of a fruit garnish is we have these, it's called a coffee siphon. It's like the 2-tiered coffee pot, and it has the brewing chamber on the bottom and then the big glass chamber on top where you would put your grounds. So we're known for doing cocktails in these. You put your cocktail in the base chamber, and then in the top you have like a tea, some citrus, maybe some dried fruits, maybe some herbs, dry ice if it's the summertime and you want it to be like jazzy and showy. And for that, a lot of times we will use like orange slices, or we take like the round all the way around a lemon, like it's the really thick, you can get probably like 2 or 3 out of a lemon. So we'll peel a bunch of those. And because it's not so much about the aroma that it gives the cocktail, it's more about kind of the bitter peel flavor as it's cooking. We'll actually freeze those in the freezer, and so they can last for as long as they need to before we use them. So we have kind of a creative way of making sure that we don't waste stuff like that for a presentation like that. For something like an old fashioned, typically if we know that on a busy night we sell 75 of them, we will go ahead and probably peel the oranges that we're going to juice that day, save those peels. We actually will manicure them, so we'll cut them into the size we need, and we'll put them into like a wet seafold. So we'll wrap them all up nicely so that the moisture is kind of retained and they don't dry out, and we'll keep them in the drawer for service. We check them the next day to see if they're still usable. A lot of times they are, and a lot of times they didn't make it. And that's kind of how we will pre-prep garnish in terms of citrus. If it's something a little bit more high touch, like we've had food garnishes before, which are super fun. We will typically go ahead and find a way to make sure that we don't waste stuff. So we used to have to, I used to have to cut honeydew melons into the tiniest, perfect, like 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter cubes. And rather than cutting these things into cubes and having them dry out and waste them, we actually started to compress them into like green chartreuse or Midori or something that had an enhancing flavor, so that we could preserve the life of these very intricate, tiny cut, like perishable items. So rather than just cutting them and leaving them, we would find ways to preserve their life. And then things like mints, or if we're using like a bell pepper or something, same thing, we only cut what we need for that day. And then typically we'll try to wrap it in something damp or wet in a closed airtight container so we can see if we can use them the next day. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. And like Juyoung, because I don't know what your staffing situation has been over the last year, but do you find, like, have you found that you've changed or altered some garnishes just to like use less prep? Because obviously like you guys are such high volume, or do you have like a porter that does all of it at the beginning of the day?
Our bar bag usually do all the juicing and all the garnishing, but I mean, our garnishes aren't food like or anything crazy like that. So I mean, we have,
Yeah.
you have your typical like lime, lemon, orange, and then like according to our menu, depending on what it is, like if we have pineapple, we do fresh squeezed pineapple, so we just make pineapple wedges, or like stuff like that, like things that are like very simple. And then we have like dry stuff too, like candy ginger, and like, or like we grate cinnamon or nutmeg and stuff like that. Mint, we always seem to run out. I don't know why, but we never seem to have enough, no matter how much I buy.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, for the most part, we don't go, I mean, our rule of thumb, and I mean, is if it doesn't look good, we just don't put anything on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because like,
And then when people do stuff to go, do you usually garnish like the plastic cups or?
Oh yeah, because for some reason people love that. Like we have a watermelon drink on the menu, and like literally if we don't put a watermelon slice in it, they're like, "Where's my watermelon?" Like it's like a big deal. I'm like, okay, I'm out of watermelon. I don't know what else you want me to do, but it's like that's also another thing I can't seem to keep on hand. I keep running out of watermelon, but like it just because it comes in a plastic cup doesn't mean it doesn't come with a garnish. And
Yeah.
people love the fact that it comes with everything, but it's in a different cup, and they love it. So
Yeah.
it really makes a difference. And for some reason, I think because the plastic cup is clearer and they can see through it better than in a glass for some reason. I don't know, but it looks better.
Yeah. When I was at Dante, it was wild because, you know, obviously so much of like when you go to their restaurants, their drinks are beautiful and like presentation is such a part of their like aesthetic and identity, right? Like when you think of a Dante drink, it's like the most beautiful, right, thing ever. And then as soon as we got to either like Aspen, where we were doing crazy volume, or the greens, it was like, okay, well, how do we take this drink and still make it look like Dante, but we have to make like 400 of them, you know, and like pre-prepare them, you know, so like the chocolate Negronis with chocolate shavings, like do we do like little chocolate discs, or, you know, instead of like beautiful rims with like all of this fruit, like do we do like a lime disc with like a salt like down the middle, or you know, like it was actually kind of fun. It was like a fun challenge to try to like not simplify but like streamline these like really gorgeous cocktails, but then, you know, be like, okay, well, we have 2 people in the kitchen and we need to make, you know, enough for 500 covers today. How do we do this? You know? Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I guess over this last year, last section, is there anything from batching that you feel like the challenges of this last year have changed and what you're going forward? Or, you know, I know like Juyoung, you said that like you guys have always batched. Is there anything that you're looking to sort of take to the next program, you know, or things that you've taken from your CAP experience that you're planning to apply to your next job?
Well, I'm not sure yet because I'm actually supposed to be at orientation today, and I told them
Oh,
I'm gonna be late. But for some odd reason, I think they're like, oh no, it's okay. They're like, we know who you are. I'm like, okay. I don't know if that makes a big difference or not, but I think they're just assuming I'm going to be picking up really quickly. But it's going to be a restaurant, so I'm not exactly sure how that arrangement happens, because every bar I go into, it's very different. The volume is different. Being so this restaurant is like supposed to be huge, but it's also supposed to be like the restaurant for the nightclub. So I don't know how the dining experience is going to be, because I've always been in fine dining restaurants or steakhouses where like things are crazy, and like we did a lot of like old fashions and martinis to go with steaks, which is easy because you could pre-prep most of those stuff. Like Alexis was saying, like pre-prep all like the orange peels and stuff like that. Like we do that now at the Dorsey. But anytime I go and help someone's bar, I'm literally looking at like, what's your volume, what you're doing. I have to like sit there and like watch for a day or two, and I come in different times to see what it's like. And unless you do that homework, it's kind of hard. But for the most part, I mean, you see like what gets popular, what's not popular, what you need to throw away. You're like, this cocktail's not working. Let's take that out, and things like that. But I mean, it's a lot of trial and error in a sense, I want to say. And I guess what I would probably bring is that things that are popular, it's great to partial batch. Although I feel like with management, it's hard for them to do inventory.
Yeah.
But I also put that in a spreadsheet because I know how to do it. But it's like trying to teach that cost concept to someone is a little difficult.
Yeah, completely. Like what we were saying earlier about like the hardest part is not even just doing it, but it's communicating it.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're doing inventory and you go in and you say, okay, well, I have, you know, I don't know, 20 liters of this martini batch. What is that?
Yeah.
You know, and have it like costed down to, okay, well, it's probably 12 liters of this gin, and, you know, like whatever, like 8 liters of this vermouth or that kind of a thing.
Yeah, because that's kind of like how we end up doing it. We're like, whatever we use, we're like, that's just count it. Like, even though we didn't use all of it, like for that month, we just count it saying we use that whole bottle.
Mhm.
Because otherwise it's like, it's going to be like way too complicated. Well, also where I'm at, someone else does our inventory, so it's a little weird.
Oh yeah. Yeah, even
So,
more.
yeah.
Yeah.
It literally is like, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just like way all over the place. And it's like, there's just too many people's hands on. Like, I like to do it all by myself and then teach someone else. But it's like, in a big corporation, doesn't work that way.
Totally. Alexis, how about you?
So funny enough, talking about batching, something that we've always done is put everything together, like we said, except for, we don't add our citrus to our batches, but, we have 2 spaces. We have the aviary and the office is, a much smaller space. And in that space, since I've started, we used to not batch anything. So you would have a 10 touch cocktail that you needed to pick up all 10 bottles. And a lot of the bartenders down there would talk about and complain, like, they're like, well, why? And so we actually started to, because for us, it was the aesthetic of the room. It's like this, leather couches, and it's like this dark space underground, like a cigar, like it was like a sexy vibe. And so the whole idea was that people are coming to like kind of watch and see. And so we thought it would be defeating the purpose of what the room was about if people picked up a single bottle and they were just pouring 3 ounces into a thing and stirring. So we tried to keep it as like classic as possible. And eventually we gave in, because then I started having to go down there and cover shifts and make the 13 touch cocktail. And I was like, no, this is bullshit. So we finally decided to start batching downstairs. And what we found was that because so many people are in and out of that space, you like lose track of batches. Things don't get flipped properly. It's not first in, first out. You lose mise en place for a batch in the walk-in. So then somebody else makes more of it. And so we found is because there were so many people involved in being in that space as bartenders, we were producing like a lot of waste, and we were having excess of things that we didn't need. So when we reopened, we decided to find a happy medium, which was to pre-batch like the liquors and the cordials and all the alcoholic things together. Like Juyoung does, maybe do things like bitters and salts to add as additional things that you add when you're making the cocktail. And then our syrups would actually get combined together. So like, for example, we do this blood orange highball. So the scotch is basically poured, but the syrup, which is the very labor intensive component, is all made together. So it's a blood orange and Earl Grey caramel, and we make that. And then that's one component that's kind of batched together in a bottle. And then you add your citrus and your ice and your soda water. So we started to see how can we make it look like we're still bartending and touching several bottles down here and giving the guests what they want without making it such a long process. And we don't want to have 15, 20-minute cocktail tickets. You still want them to be fast, but you still want to have it look like you're doing stuff. So we kind of took a couple steps back and found a really good place to be in that space. And with the aviary, we haven't really changed too much. We're still batching the same way that we have. The only thing that we're doing differently is we've kind of rearranged how we look at prep. So we have an opening person that will come in who's in charge of prep, and they'll start pulling bottles, and they'll start getting the bar ready. And then they'll actually go through and see what needs to be made behind that. So we're not over prepping based on just somebody going in and scanning. Somebody's actually physically hands-on, touching things, moving things, saying, I only have 6 of this left, let me make another 6 bottles. And we've also taught the prep team it's okay to scale down. If you have a 22 quart batch and you only want to make X amount, like go ahead and scale it down based on like a percentage or a ratio. And so they've actually taught themselves to readjust our batches so that they could make an additional 6 bottles because we have a slow night. So we're like in this weird, let's just be flexible and go with what's happening stage right now. But I think it's something that we'll actually keep doing once we get busier and busier, because like I said, it causes a lot less waste and a lot of better communication and no more miscommunication, because people are kind of being very smart about how they're handling their batches and how they're looking at how much stuff we produce. So we've kind of found this weird place that we're in right now, which is high volume batching, but like make it smaller, if you will. And it feels really good, actually. Like, it feels like we have a better grip on all of the things that are happening on our bar, even though we have 7 or 8 different people like maneuvering and doing different things. So yeah, it feels like it's a good place.
All right. So as like one last send off, we got a question from Trevor. Hi, Trevor. Biggest batch horror story. What would our biggest batch horror story be? I'm thinking, I know that they've been out there.
Batch horror stories.
Okay.
So I got one too. You
got
first,
one?
though.
Okay.
You go first.
Batches that go missing. Yes, that is definitely a thing when batches go missing. So at PDT, we actually used to do a ton of events, whether it was like a charity or, I don't know, something like that. So we actually did a ton of batching, which capping helped. But we used to do the James Beard Media Party, and it used to be sponsored by Lucky Peach magazine. And so the drinks coincided with whatever theme of the magazine was. And the first year we did it, the theme of the magazine was Eat Your Veggies. And so we always served way too many cocktails, but we had 8 cocktails and all of them had vegetables in it. And this was for like 600 people. So it was like a penicillin with carrot juice, like carrot and turmeric, and like El Diablo with beets, and vodka julep with pea puree. But everything was like times, it was like, oh, okay, I need like 15 quarts of carrot juice. And so we're like in PDT with just like, it looks like we just took half the Union Square Green Market in. The event was at like 9, and I think we started at like 9 a.m. So it took so long. We had one little Breville juicer just like trying to extract all these veggies. And then the next year was actually it was a chicken seminar, and chicken episode, and we were like, we're not doing it, sorry. We're not doing egg cocktails for 600 people. But that was that. I still have painful memories of batching all that juice.
I actually have 2, and I'll make them quick. Number 1, we had somebody pour salt into our sugar bin at work. And if anyone has ever been into our spaces, we share a prep kitchen in the basement with the restaurant next door, which is Next. So the bins of sugar and salt are massive. Like, once again, I could sit inside one of these bins, and somebody filled the entire sugar bin with salt, which to me, I'm like, how could you not tell the difference? Like, the salt looks like big chunks and sugar is more great. But regardless, people went about their day doing whatever they were going to do, and sugar was replaced with salt in all of our batches that day. We found out like halfway through service what was going on. I think because that was also a day where somebody did not properly taste. We taste all of our batches at the beginning of service. Our bartenders put up tastes of everything so we can make sure things are right. And that day probably happened to be a day where somebody just didn't have time or something happened. So that was like a horrific nightmare, was having all of the sugar and all of our drinks replaced with salt. So yes, always taste things. The other one is, God bless them, but we had Maison Premier come about 5 years ago, do like a takeover, I think before one of the James Beards Awards when they first came to Chicago. So they were there the night before, and having other people come into your bar that do things much differently than you do. We've done a few takeovers. We did like an Empayon one that came in, and actually Nomad, when they released one of their books, came in. Having to adjust what you do to what other people do and have to find polite ways to tell them like, no, you can't do that, is probably, I'm like a big control freak at work. So things have to be a certain way. Otherwise I kind of go like off the rails. But having these people in your spaces and you have to be really nice and like put on a polite face and say like, no, like absolutely not, is so stressful. If I never have to do like a pop-up or a bar takeover where you're batching for other people and they keep messaging you, hey, we changed something. Oh, hey, we need 700 more of those berries that you guys can't find. Oh, hey, we decided we're going to skewer all of these garnishes now. We're not going to just put them in the drinks. Like, it makes you want to go batty. And as much as you love people, like, I think some of my horror stories come from like having to do batches for other people and reading their recipes and being like, I can't do this. I can't make that much of that for you. No. Yeah.
Juyoung, any stories?
Well, I guess my main one was this was when we first opened up Dorsey. We were asked to do the Pebble Beach Food and Wine and LA Food and Wine and all the other food and wine festivals that are out there. And I remember the Pebble Beach Food and Wine, they said that our first cocktails that we were serving was at 7 a.m. at a golf course. And we got there like 2 days prior. No, it was 1 day prior, but in the morning. And they told us all our stuff would show up in the afternoon and nothing showed up till like 6 at night. And we were batching all of that all the way till like, I don't even know what time it was, maybe midnight or so. And then we had to go eat dinner and then finally go to bed. And then we'd wake up at 4 a.m. to be there to serve at 7 a.m. and carry all the batches to the golf course. So that was fun. We learned, well, because we're in Vegas and then we take everything to California, we can't do anything with alcohol until we get to California. So we can't buy our liquor and then send it there because, I mean, even though we can get it at a better price because, you know, legality, but we kind of figured out a way to do it the other way around the following year. We batched everything and just put them in plastic bags and said, this is our liquor. This is just our liquid. And then when we got there, we bottled it up and then used it.
Nice. Yeah.
So we're like, this is most of our cocktail. We just need to add that liquor in there because it was like the sponsored liquor. Or like, this is everything else. And then we're just going to put that in there. So then we figured out we'll do all the juicing and everything in Vegas to ship it the next day in a refrigerator, whatever. And then when we got there, we just did everything. And then we just made sure that the next 2 night events were booze forward cocktail, not citrus cocktails.
You're like, you know what you really want right now on this beach is a martini. Yeah.
But I mean, like, there was like so much juice and stuff everywhere else. I'm like, take this martini, go to that stand, add carrot juice, and go to that stand, add an orange, go to that stand and check out their strawberries. And we're like, and then you make
mixology. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're like, it's cocktail per table.
There you go.
Yeah, but the horror story is like when like things don't show up and then they're like, how are these tools? And you're like, you want me to juice with a hand juicer? You're like, no, I asked for an actual juicer, not a hand juicer.
Yeah,
you're like, I'm gonna make 22 liters of lime juice with my hand. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. Yeah,
Man.
totally. Well, anyways, thank you guys so much. If anybody has any questions, I'm sure you can reach out to us. Our Instagram handles are on the Tales of the Cocktail page. Feel free to, I know I don't want to speak for you guys, but you can shoot me a message anytime. And I'll try to think of more horror stories if I got them. Hopefully no more in the future. But anyways, thank you all so much for listening. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.